Welcome to Advent Conversations with Good Samaritan Church in Pinellas Park, Florida. Well, Sue and Martha, thanks for being with me today. We sometimes forget that part in the Christmas story that takes place in Egypt. Where does Egypt enter the Christmas story?
Well, it starts with an angel telling Joseph that he must leave and take Mary and the baby to Egypt because Herod is going to kill all of the babies. So that's why they go to Egypt.
And why is Herod going to kill all these babies?
Because he's scared that a new king has been born.
Yeah, the wise ones have told him a king's been born, and he's very insecure about what that means for his power.
Right. We have a leader who doesn't want to leave and lose his power. Absolutely. And I love all the dreams that take part in getting them there. And I think particularly with Joseph, it's so cool because at the beginning of the dream to marry Mary, to wed her, and now this dream to go to Egypt, and the wise ones before that having the dream to go home by another way. And the things that scripture tells you, these things happened. They came true that were dreamed about, that there was the slaughter of innocents. And once they left and Herod was so angry, that he had all the children in the area of Bethlehem under age of 2 killed. And we have Rachel, it says, weeping for her children. And Rachel, who had been Jacob's wife, was the mother of another Joseph of the coat of many colors who had dreams. So I love seeing all the intertwining through the centuries of the dreams. And was in a dream group once, and we studied some of the dreams in the scripture. And it was interesting to me because I don't think it ever says Jesus dreamed or Jesus had a dream. And I've thought a lot about that. Like, is it because Jesus is the dream? Or, is his vision of shalom the dream, but not saying he dreamed it? It just was part of his ongoing communication with God. But I love that idea of all these dreamers in the Bible and the ones that listened. And I think that's hard sometimes for me. You get an idea and you go with it, but they had dreams along the way. And it's like, whoa, hold it. You're not there. Keep listening. Keep coming to God in prayer each step of the way. And I thought that was really encouraging.
Yeah, right. Joseph doesn't have one dream or two. He has 3 dreams. It's never God's done speaking to him. He has dreams all along the way where the message keeps being revealed. And part of that message is take your family up, leave your homeland, cross borders, and seek refuge in another land among another people. Basically become refugees.
Yeah. You always talk about wonder questions. And that my wonder question is, how was it in Egypt? How were they greeted in Egypt at this time? Were they welcomed? Were they shunned? How did they find a place to stay again? I don't know. It's a wonderful story. Maybe someone's imagined this. Maybe Martha is a storyteller. Maybe she can. Wouldn't that be fun to create a story of what happened to them in Egypt? Yeah.
And how long did they stay?
Yeah.
Really stay.
Yeah.
The next time we hear something is when they take Jesus to the temple and he gets lost, or they think he's lost. So they could have stayed there 12 years.
I think about stories of refugees and people, especially people trying to cross the border into our own country right now. And if we're writing this country about them coming here to the U.S., we'd probably say Jesus would have been separated from his parents, would be in a cage somewhere, separated from them. And what a horrific story. If we replace Egypt with United States and set it in our own time.
I know our country sometimes has put out a stamp with them, like on the way to Egypt, but makes it look so idyllic. I've never quite gotten that connection, with the child already born and they're just, the star's still there. And I don't know.
That was not the first time people in the Bible had gone to Egypt. The first one I can think of was Abraham and Sarah going to Egypt because of a famine.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, Joseph's family came to Egypt because of a famine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Egypt has been a part of the whole story.
Yeah. And I think Matthew, particularly writing to the Jewish people, presents throughout kind of Jesus as the new Moses for this time period. So you need that Egypt part. And I always thought it was interesting that in Hebrew, Egypt means narrow places. And I've thought a lot about what are the narrow places that hem us in today, whether it's politics, putting somebody in a certain category. Thinking to old ways of seeing ourselves and being able to grow. I was always amazed, I think, as a pastor, sometimes hearing how people remembered they could be 80 years old and remember something that was said to them as a child. Or I know my mother was a gorgeous woman, some of you know her, but as she wore glasses as a young girl in those days was called Four Eyes. And, things that people still hold on to from those Egypt narrow places in their lives and, or even aging, how do we see our bodies or our minds calling us all to leave these narrow places and get a wider view.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think do not fear is the most repeated commandment in the Bible, but second, I believe, to that is remember. And the Hebrew people are always being challenged to remember who their God is. And when God identifies God's self, very often it's, remember, I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. Egypt is their great liberation stories that had been passed on from generation to generation. And so here is Jesus' family fleeing first to Egypt and then being brought back from Egypt.
And in stages again, having the dream, oh, Herod's dead, you can go back. And they head back and then whoops, the new leader is just as bad. So to fulfill the prophecy perhaps or whatever, then leading them towards Nazareth and Galilee. Bringing it to today, I guess, I was thinking of the plagues, and thinking of our time today and kind of water to blood and the pollution of our waterways or the lice or the little things in COVID, locusts, the climate change and how the whole earth responds to that. They had hail, and I'm thinking of hurricanes or fires pelting the world and just thinking of, we've been going through a lot, as every generation does, I think. But,
you mentioned that postage stamp you had seen a while back of this flight to Egypt, and it's so idyllic and not
little palm trees ahead.
Yeah, probably not the harrowing journey that it really was. And I think about back in beginning of March, our family setting out on what seemed like the adventure of a lifetime, this sabbatical trip funded by a grant that we were going to take in Europe. And then getting to Europe and suddenly a message coming from a friend of ours, you've got to get out now. They're closing the borders. You're not going to be able to leave Spain. And our very first night in Europe, hopping in a rental car and trying to navigate our way across the French border. And it turned from idyllic to a very scary journey. And I imagine for their family, even if they were going to stay with relatives in Egypt, to get up and just leave everything like that and have to make this escape with all the kind of looming dangers around you. I think it's so scary.
What did you learn from that?
I think for me, the biggest thing was I really felt the community of Good Sam back here praying for us. There was a day when I had a big oopsie moment, and I managed to put diesel in the gasoline rental car engine.
Before.
We realized before we started the car, so we didn't damage the car. But in France, it turns out you have to call the police when you're on the interstate, and they come and they tow your car. And the tow truck driver showed up, didn't speak any English, and I really speak very, very little French, more Spanish than I do French. And so he showed up, and we could hardly communicate. And he's motioning to me to get in the cab, and Julie and the kids were in the gas station. And so suddenly I'm in this cab driving to I don't know where with this guy with the rental car. And we get to the mechanic's shop, and it's in the middle of nowhere, this industrial area. I have no idea where I am. And the guy gets out, tells me to get all the stuff out of the rental car, and I do. And he's got this nice little waiting room, and I think, okay, I'm going to wait in the waiting room. The rental car company has said they're going to send a taxi for me. And then no, he wanted me to go wait. It was like this compound with this gate, and he wanted me to take all our luggage and go sit on the curb basically with our luggage. And he drives off to go tow the next person. So I'm there without any idea where I am, just waiting. And Julie and the kids are at this gas station with no mode of transportation, not knowing what they're going to do. And we were all pretty scared. It was getting dark and cold, and the gas station where they were was closing soon. And, miraculously somehow when this taxi driver picked me up, he didn't speak any English either, but he called a friend of his who did. And I'm trying to tell them, this bizarre situation, say my family is back at this gas station. We've got to go get them. And just before he was about to pass the exit where they were, she managed to communicate it to him, and he got off, and we got the family all back together. And that was a moment when I reached out to our sabbatical transition or leadership team, and I knew they were all praying like mad for us. And I really had a powerful sense at that moment that we were not on our own, that there was a whole community.
That's beautiful.
Behind us.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. What a trip.
Well, what else would we say about us today? Why is it important to us today that this Egypt part of the story is there in the Christmas story?
I don't know. I think my brain's going in all different directions. Part goes back to the old story and what are we slaves to, whether it's the racism, consumerism, money, what do we need to leave behind us? But in other ways, who knows on the story that we don't know what happened to them there. And maybe it was a time like you were looking forward to the sabbatical. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it was a time apart to be gathering and watching this child start to grow and thinking of their responsibilities of parents and how will our lives be shaped and what can we rely on? And are there more dreams coming, or we just keep up our prayer and that is the dream? I don't know. To me, it's so wide open.
Matthew may have been intentionally vague, I don't know, in talking about that piece of the journey. But I think, of Matthew largely writing for Jewish writers, and how he just pulled that whole narrative of coming out of slavery and all of that into Jesus' story, so much so that, this Christmas story, that's the prologue of Matthew's gospel.
Yes.
And it's going to kind of foreshadow that Jesus is going to be that, like you said, a new Moses, a liberator.
And I couldn't remember, it seemed to me that I learned once that it had been so many years since God had spoken to the people before Jesus. Is that right? It's so many centuries and generations. I couldn't remember what it was. But again, reinforcing that ongoing revelation of God, that God is still speaking, today, now in our lives, if we listen.
You really sense in these birth narratives of Jesus, suddenly, after, I think it was 4 centuries or something, God is suddenly on the scene and speaking in all sorts of ways through these divine messengers and dreams and
and if we think God is still speaking, then obviously God was, to me, that's not the scriptural, was still speaking during those centuries, but maybe we just weren't hearing, or were too busy.
Suddenly there were people willing to listen.
Yeah. Or maybe even, Herod's, or that time, you start looking for a way out. You start listening maybe more than you ever would have before, when things were just going along and normal.
Well, thank you, Sue and Martha, for this conversation about Egypt. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for joining us for Advent Conversations as we continue on the journey of this season.